thank everyone for coming. And I feel very honored by Dominic having asked me to give a talk on Trollope here among you. I just will read it out as best I can as talk. I do actually do papers at conferences. And so what I do is I write papers that are talky. My topic is the modernity of the last Chronicle of Barset. This past spring, a small group of people on Trollope and his contemporaries, now at Groups IO, read the last Chronicle of Barset together over a period of about 13 weeks. When we were done, I felt convinced that if Trollope cannot be said to be objectively accurate when he calls it the best novel I have written, he was right to say it's a masterpiece that deserves to be singled out among his novels. When we began reading the book, it was with the thought, a couple of us worried about this, that it has perhaps become dated because it's no longer the famous signature book Trollope readers go to first or are recommended to read. How could this upper middle class world, semi-rural or suburban, which D.A. Miller once characterized as the novel as usual, ho-hum, as a place where there are no police literally to be found, be connected to us? No one here on screen with me will be surprised to be told that we discovered the last Chronicle of Barset is not an obsolete book. Early on, we had been particularly fired up by parallels between the way the Reverend Mr. Crawley is treated and Victor Hugo's Jean Valjean, and the plight of and the way African Americans in the US are placed beyond sympathy. John Berger argues that all art is experienced in a context, and our context was at first the coronavirus quarantine, which we were all part of, and at last, protest, demonstration, and violence in American streets. As we started, someone right away wrote of how in Framley Parsonage, Mrs. Crawley comes perilously close to dying of typhus fever, while Lucy Roberts selflessly risks her health and life nursing Mrs. Crawley night and day. In previous group reads and discussions, I had found myself very grated upon by the lack of sympathy for Crawley and the character I had regarded as the primary heroine of the book, Lily Dale. But this time at book's end, I have become so involved with Mrs. Crawley's plight that at long last I read Joanna Trollope's The Rector's Wife, which I had been told in passing had much in it that recalled Barsetshire. Joanna Trollope confirmed my new sense that the central heroine of Last Chronicle ought to be Mary Crawley. So I sat down and wrote 2 blogs to call attention to the value and modernity of Trollope's Last Chronicle of Barset. And today I've come to tell some of what I wrote. Might hear my daughter singing in another room. There is just no doubt in my mind that had Josiah Crawley's story unfolded today, he would have become infected with the coronavirus and perhaps died, compromised as his health was after years of arduous hard work on scarcely any food, of intense stress from grief, loss, and humiliation because his pay as a perpetual curate was egregiously derisory, while the nature of his work took him perpetually among the poorest, who of course would have been sick and dying in large numbers. Josiah Crawley is more of a hero of our time, though, than Hugo's Jean Valjean. For Trollope's theme is how inequality works. Trollope in the Last Chronicle dramatizes what he does elsewhere too. He is seriously and at length accounting for not how Crawley came about that 20 pounds, but how and why having it, this man ends up indicted on a serious criminal charge. Anthony Trollope examines the humanly made phenomena and ideas that provoke such a distrust and lack of respect for a man as to render him vulnerable to prison. Trollope uncovers the danger and wretchedness of Crawley's social identity in the context of the community who rule over him. Like Jean Valjean, Crawley is accused of the smallest of crimes. He cannot remember where he got a 20-pound note, which seems to have been used to pay down a debt for desperately needed groceries. But unlike Hugo's hero, the point our author makes is not that Crawley was driven to steal. Neither our author or anyone in the book can believe Crawley would ever mean to do something said to be morally wrong. It's rather the pressure of living under such deprived conditions as Crawley must daily endure has made him unable to pay attention to the embittering details of open charity. In the book's first chapter, the first thing we are shown is how Crawley is regarded with distaste and suspicion by the males who get to be magistrates and sit on juries. He is disliked and has been the subject of complaint by one creditor in particular. He is not the only man to be looked askance at by the local middle class. A Hogglestock brickmaker had asked for change from a bank and been refused, and only when he came back with a check with Mr. Crawley's name on it was he paid. That check is, of course, then scrutinized. In last Chronicle, Trollope provides another set of characters in London who I'm not going to deal with much and who are much richer and get away with very crooked dealings. Stockbrokers with other people's thousands of pounds, but not one of them comes near to having anyone threaten to arrest him or her. A £20 note. I risked the charge of presentism by aligning Mr. Crawley with George Floyd, who a clerk called the police on because he was a black man who tried to buy a small item with a $20 bill the clerk thought might be counterfeit. We all know what happened to George Floyd. There's a lot of literary allusion in this book. One is to a battered old copy of Milton's Samson Agonistes. Mr. Crawley likes to read with his children. Crawley identifies with the man in the line, eyeless in Gaza, at the mill with slaves. It's quoted in the book. Time constraints forced me to summarize many dialogues before we get to the jury trial. Some suggest there is no pity due this man. Why did he take this position when he knew the salary by itself would not provide enough money for him to live as a clergyman with a family? The community feeling is it's somehow his fault his family starves, live in embarrassingly worn-out clothes. His personality is to blame. Otherwise, it's implied he'd have been promoted. Chapter 5 depicts the acute poverty of the Crawleys. Not one person challenges the establishment which has made such a position with such a derisory salary for a learned gentleman to work in. No one but his daughter Grace seems to pay attention to or value her father's learning, and she is after all forced to by him. And it does her no economic or social good in the school she is an unpaid teacher at. Once it's discovered her father is disgraced. We do learn that any scene involving money is traumatic for Josiah Crawley. That's why he was a vulnerable scapegoat for those who might have stolen the check as a convenient cover for their own crimes. The bishop's wife, Mrs. Proudie, exploits the sort of loophole that often exists in power shared by various people, where it's not clear that the bishop has the authority to stop Crawley from preaching because he has not yet been found guilty. We watch Crawley stand up to this treatment and express the agony of his soul in a letter to the bishop. I am in a terrible strait. Trouble and sorrow and danger are upon me and mine. It may well be, as your lordship says, that the bitter waters of the present hour may pass over my head and destroy me. I thank your lordship for telling me whither I am to look for assistance. But the deeper my troubles, the greater my sorrow, the more pressing my danger, the stronger is my need that I should carry myself these days with that outward respect of self which will teach those around me to know that, let who will condemn me, I have not condemned myself. To Mrs. Proudie, he defends his behavior by saying ever so succinctly in a phrase just now, my favorite in the book, opposition to usurped authority is an imperative duty. Let me say I'm not here as a member of Team Josiah Crawley, lest you mistake my drift. I see the solution to the book's mystery, where did he get it, as capable of being given a peculiar anti-Crawley, anti-feminist, and feminist twist all at once. The origin of some of Crawley's misery is, as is alas, common with him, partly self-inflicted. The dean's wife, Mrs. Eleanor Arabin, has inherited a legacy from her husband, John Bold, way back in Barchester Towers. And she has the power to transfer bills she gets as rent on her property to other people. Being a woman, she either does not know the particulars of bill transmission or she is careless about it. She simply slipped the bill into a folder of bills her husband was intent on giving Mr. Crawley as charity. To be fair, how is she to know this bill had come to the tenant from his brother, who had gotten it from a crook, who saw it fall from the hands of an aristocratic lord's man of business? The crook snatched it up and put it forward as rent. Now for the feminist twist. Hitherto, the Arabins have been slipping these sums of money and other gifts into the silent, willing hands of Mrs. Crawley, but the husband, indignant and irate that his wife should take it upon herself to accept such monies and not tell him, demanded that the people no longer give Mrs. Crawley anything, but rather make the offers to him. Now, had it been Mrs. Crawley, whose mind is clear, she would have been able to account for who gave her these bills in this folder. So his taking over the will of his wife, demanding her abject obedience, backfired. I'm not sure Trollope meant us to, or himself saw, this whirligig of time taking its revenges on Crawley as a merciless bully over his wife. I do surmise Joanna Trollope did see how cruelly Mrs. Crawley is robbed of any selfhood by this man and could not bear her abject life and wrote a post-text to free her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The book's second traumatized character, Lily Dale, is nowadays frequently attacked online or and in conventionally published writing too, for refusing to marry. I cannot say Trollope is wholly on Lily's side. The last chronicle in part rehashes a story told in the small house of Allington, where Lily Dale is stunned and her deepest private feelings violated. She also experiences a Crawley-like public humiliation. After not only engaging herself to Adolphus Crosby, but making it plain to all she has given him her heart and soul, and some have argued her body too, made herself abjectly his. Lily is, within a week of the engagement, cast aside by Crosby for a cold, apparently rich, titled woman. Not long afterwards, a young man, Johnny Eames, who has loved Lily since boyhood, offers himself in marriage, as it were, once again. But apart from Lily never having been attracted to Eames sexually, she is emotionally shattered in ways analogous to a raped girl. Lily, I maintain, is a version of Mary Piper's Ophelia in her 1990s sociological study, Reviving Ophelia, of abrasive, punitive experiences of heterosexuality in a modern girl's teen years who has sustained severe damage. In last chronicle, Crosby, now a widower of small, barely adequate means, his wife's family having fleeced him, thinks to offer himself again to Lily. The problem is, paradoxically, Lily still loves this man whose resemblance to an ultimately destructive ideal of manhood allured, enthralled, and deluded her. When Mrs. Dale, Lily's mother, explains Crosby's audacious letter with, "Perhaps he thinks he is offering a remedy for your misery," Lily is stung. Crosby considers he is making up for what happened. He assumes he is doing her a favor. And we have seen, and see again in this book, given Crosby shallower nature than Lily's, were she to marry him, he would soon act on the idea she needs him far more than he does her. He would let her know it, would not appreciate her since she did not value herself enough. Her mother loathes him far more than Lily and writes what would think would make him cease. It does not. There is another parallel with Crawley. Lily's pride is as strong, and we see in London that she should have to endure a life of isolation with Crosby because he's not accepted by any of her friends. In all Trollope's novels, pride is central to people's mental health itself. So badly do we need to think well of ourselves. I find the reply Lily gives to Eames's final proposal face to face the same one she would and does, in effect, in the London scenes give to Crosby. I will not have myself planted out in the middle for people to look at. What there is left would die soon. The later parts of Last Chronicle, which concern Lily, chapters 45, 52, 76, and following, are there to show us how and why Lily comes to choose an unmarried life. She goes to pieces when she's directly confronted by Crosby in front of all the others. She rejects Emily Dunstable's notions of what marriage is. She's not keen on the Bernards of her world, and denies that married women have the best of it. Mrs. Thorne, formerly Miss Dunstable, accuses Lily of allowing a hard, morbid sentiment to destroy her life. Trollope's narrator, whom many people tell us is not Trollope, insists Lily loves Eames and that she was near saying yes until knowledge of Eames's affair with yet another woman and his lying notes to this woman turned Lily off Johnny once again. But this narrator also admits that Eames's refusal to give up shows Eames's pride. Eames is also driven to produce some symbol of his male prowess, even if it's only hours on a train without sleep. Our narrator implies Eames wants to show the others he is the preferred hero. Granted, it's not Eames's strategy to confront Lily with the assumption she must marry to have a legitimate life, but he sends Mrs. Arabin, who makes just this point. Lily must open up to another man, compromise. But Lily sees in Eames's toying words another person she cannot trust to. And the book takes seriously Lily's shattered state. Trollope's brilliant metaphor for Lily is shattered tree. Lily is the closest Trollope ever comes to depicting for us a respectable girl who has been sexually shipwrecked, another word the narrator and Lily use of herself more than once. The buried images of wood, wrecked, shattered. Once you axe the wood's fibers, it is so much weaker. It could be Johnny will be kind, generous, and mostly loyal, but that does not mean she will be able to respond to whatever he is. She cannot be what he wants. On my blog and on List, I wrote that when I was maimed as a teenager by sexual encounters and abuse, I have gotten back the comment, you should not be, and there is something wrong with you. Get over it. So, Mrs. Thorne, sometimes it's implied in ordinary life the admirable person just emerges the stronger. In a conversation I once had with my father, he presented an explanatory image, a piece of wood originally strong and fine, but then someone took a big axe and struck hard, and the wood was never the same again, immeasurably shaken, immeasurably unsturdy. To switch from these metaphors to people, sometimes such a person needs to take care of herself differently from others to keep herself intact. Modern readers can sympathize more with Lily to go traveling, write for newspapers, have a vocation. But Trollope is profoundly against regarding women as having value individually. They must be wives and want to be mothers to be seen as useful and respectable and whole. So he will not permit Lily to travel or have a vocation or even a job. In Trollope's fiction, Lily Dale can only vanish to the peace and security of the kind uncle, mother, and small house. But is the romance of Major Grantley and Grace Crawley hopelessly past its sell-by date? Major Grantley insists on, so his parents see it, shaming them because he wants as his second wife the daughter of the impoverished, indicted Crawley. Major Grantley repeats he values, esteems, loves Grace, and no one has the right to interfere with such a central life choice. The modernity in this story that matters is not that wealthy parents have ever, and probably still do what they can, to prevent even an older child from marrying down. Major Grantley is, after all, a widow over 30. I think the power of the story derives from the crux that almost immediately comes up as the story unfolds. Grantley's father, the archdeacon, had persuaded his son to give up a good income in the military in order to live the life of a gentleman of leisure near his parents. Now, Major Grantley is heavily dependent on that father to carry on such a life, and the father says he will take back this allowance if the Major marries Grace. Trollope's narrator and even the Major empathize with the Grantley's presence, the Grantley's parents' idea they have the right to pressure even a fully adult son to not lower his status in the world by his life choices, lest he seem to lower theirs. I suggest that Trollope can be taken and meant us to see how dangerous it is to give up one's monetary independence based on a promise. I would like to believe Joanna Trollope meant to enable Trollope's heroines beyond Mary Crawley to stop being defined and controlled in their behavior by an imprisoning category. In Joanna's novel, A Rector's Wife, or as one of women supporting a male institution with work and life no male would do or live by, like in last Chronicle, decorating churches as the squire's old maid niece. Lily, and for that matter Grace, are as controlled as Mary Crawley, but I don't believe it. I rather say you can extend Joanna's perspective to all three because it's relevant. In The Rector's Wife, Joanna Trollope creates a closely analogous married couple with troubled lives. We are told the story of a highly intelligent and well-meaning but underpaid, disrespected, and therefore humiliated, proud, inwardly raging Reverend Peter Bovary, and his, up to this point, selfless, equally intelligent, compliant, overworked, and not paid at all wife, Anna. Change the vowel sounds and you have Emma Bovary. Only Anna does not seek romance or a lover. She seeks a job that pays enough to make her independent of Peter's disapproval. The school that she wants to send her daughter to is Catholic, and what's more, his salary will not pay for it. Now she has her own money to put her daughter in a better school that the good daughter can thrive in. The child was being bullied in the secular school. Striking moments bring the Bovary and Crawley stories together. Anna is accused of choosing to be a clerk in a supermarket to reveal to the world that the church establishment is refusing to pay her husband adequately and exploiting and preying on his silenced, loyal family. We follow Peter becoming more and more rigid, more destructive of his own marriage as he demands his own way and obedience to his will. He takes the extraordinary step of quitting her job for her. When he is told she is now sexually unfaithful too, the charge is mistaken. He becomes so traumatized during a reckless car drive, it's not clear whether or no he wills his own death by ramming into a bus. The way in which Anna's behavior is discussed in the context of her women friends' choices in the book and all their fates constitute a feminist reaction, especially to Mary Crawley. Anna refuses to be defrauded of a life of her own because of the way her marriage turned out. I have admitted much that is enjoyable and beautifully done in the last chronicle. The slow, gradual pace as the pairs and trios of chapters unfold, reaching emotional climaxes consonant with the action. It's very carefully done, installment, contrast, and comparison, interwoven patterning. There are a host of minor characters well observed. I call attention to the pragmatic philosophy of that wonderful sleuth, Mr. Toogood, and his goodness. Some wonderfully realized types. Dr. Temple, the man of business as a clergyman. Mark Roberts, now grown older, ever the partisan. I agree with Stephen Wall that Mr. Harding's visits to his cello are among the most moving passages Trollope ever wrote. He would gaze upon the thing he loved, and he would pass his fingers among the broad strings, and ever and anon he would produce from one of them a low, melancholy, almost unearthly sound. And then he would pause, never daring to produce two such notes in succession, one close upon the other. They were the ghost of the melodies of days long past. He imagined that his visits were unsuspected, but the voice of the violoncello had been recognized by the servants and by his daughter. And when that low wail was heard through the house, like the last dying note of a dirge, they would all know that Mr. Harding was visiting his old friend. It is not useful to be too uncritical. A couple of people in the group reading felt there was too much repetition from the earlier Barset books. What had been done with such freshness and subtlety in the love stories of the small house was here reduced, a bit tiresome. The thick ethnographic landscape of Framley Parsonage world become too neat. Miss Dunstable as Mrs. Thorne was too complacent. But not Lady Lufton, who in her generous-hearted and manipulative charity to Mrs. Crawley springs to complex life once again. I loved her at any rate, a rare, strong, good woman, still, however disguised, in charge, guardedly yet full-heartedly intelligent, generous, cleverly forceful, and acting independently. That's it.